Welcome to Nikki's Nightmares, where chilling tales come to life. In today's terrifying story, we descend into the world of rest stop mysteries and unexplained disappearances, where lonely highways, empty parking lots, and isolated roadside stops become the setting for real-life nightmares. From travelers who vanished without a trace beneath the cover of darkness, to brutal unsolved murders hidden deep along forgotten highways. These chilling encounters reveal what can happen when the road goes silent and help is nowhere nearby. Flickering lights, endless stretches of empty asphalt, and strangers emerging from the darkness will leave you questioning what's really waiting at the next stop ahead. If you love scary stories, paranormal encounters, and true horror experiences, you're in the right place. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join me as we delve into the deep, dark, and the mysterious. The Blind River Rest Stop Murders. On the morning of June 28, 1991, Gord and Jackie McAllister pulled their motorhome into a lonely rest stop near Blind River, Ontario. The highway was empty. The trees surrounding the parking area stood motionless in the darkness, swallowing almost every trace of light. It felt isolated, forgotten, like the kind of place people pass through without ever remembering. Just before 1 a.m., the couple was asleep inside their RV when pounding erupted against the window. At first, it sounded official. A man outside identified himself as a police officer. He claimed the motorhome needed to be moved immediately. Half awake and confused, Jackie opened the door. That was the moment everything changed. The man burst inside carrying both a .22 caliber rifle and a 20-gauge shotgun. Long hair framed his face as he demanded money and valuables with terrifying calmness. There was no panic in his voice, no hesitation. According to Gord later, it didn't feel like a robbery spiraling out of control. It felt planned, deliberate, as though the gunman had already decided someone was going to die before he ever knocked on the door. Jackie began searching through her purse. Then the gunfire exploded inside the cramped motorhome. Jackie was shot first. Gord was wounded moments later, but somehow managed to escape the RV and dive beneath it for cover. From underneath the vehicle, bleeding and terrified, he watched the nightmare continue unfolding around him. Then headlights appeared. Another car had entered the rest stop. 29-year-old Brian Major had unknowingly driven straight into the middle of the attack. Before he could escape, the gunman opened fire again, killing him beside his vehicle before disappearing into the darkness. For several horrifying seconds, Gord remained hidden beneath the motorhome, listening to the silence that followed. Somewhere beyond the trees, the killer fled in a blue van heading east toward Sudbury. The witness who later reported seeing the van described it tearing out of the rest stop at high speed, vanishing into the empty highway night as if it had never been there at all. But Gord was still alive. Wounded and barely able to move, he crawled back into the blood-soaked RV and drove onto the highway, searching desperately for help. Eventually, he managed to flag down a passing truck driver, but it was already too late. Jackie McAllister and Brian Major were dead, and somewhere out there, the killer had simply disappeared. Police investigated thousands of blue vans across both Canada and the United States. Gord studied endless rows of mugshots, desperately searching for the face burned into his memory. Years later, investigators even used computer-enhanced composite technology to recreate the suspect more accurately. But no arrest ever came. Then, in 1999, suspicion turned toward former police officer Ronald Glenn West after DNA linked him to other murders in Ontario. Some believed he could also be responsible for the Blind River killings. His own wife reportedly admitted the composite sketch resembled him wearing a wig. Yet despite the suspicion, no conclusive evidence ever tied him to the murders. To this day, the Blind River rest stop killings remain unsolved, and somewhere along that dark stretch of highway in Ontario, there is still a rest stop where two innocent people crossed paths with a stranger who seemed to emerge from the darkness itself, only to disappear back into it again. 4 shots in the darkness. The stillness of the French Alps can feel peaceful during the day, endless mountain roads winding through dense forests, quiet rest stops tucked between cliffs and darkness. But late at night, those same roads can feel isolating in a way that becomes deeply unsettling, especially when there's nobody around to hear you scream. In the summer of 2011, a 29-year-old divorced father named Xavier Balligant left Belgium with his 2 young children for what was supposed to be a simple camping trip through the Rhône Alps region of France. Friends described him as devoted to his children, the kind of father trying to rebuild his life after hardship. Nothing about that trip suggested it would end in violence. But during the early morning hours of July 19th, something happened at a lonely rest stop in the French Alps that remains unsolved to this day. At approximately 2 a.m., Xavier was driving home with his children asleep in the vehicle when he pulled into the Malvaux rest area. The motorway was quiet. The mountains around the rest stop were completely dark, with only scattered lights illuminating the empty parking lot and restroom building. It was the kind of place most travelers stop without a second thought. A quick restroom break, then back onto the road. Xavier quietly exited the vehicle, leaving his sleeping children behind, and walked toward the restroom alone. Moments later, a motorway maintenance employee passing nearby heard gunshots echo through the silence. At first, the sounds were almost surreal against the stillness of the mountains, sharp cracks cutting through the cold alpine air. The employee immediately investigated the area, likely expecting some kind of accident or disturbance. Instead, he discovered something horrifying. Xavier's body was lying in front of one of the restroom stalls. He had been shot 4 times. The killer was gone. There were signs that Xavier had fought desperately for his life before he died. Injuries on his hands suggested a violent struggle had taken place inside or near the restroom. In those final moments, he may have tried to wrestle away the weapon or defend himself against someone who attacked without warning in the middle of the night. But despite the violence of the encounter, investigators found almost nothing that explained who the killer was or why Xavier had been targeted. Truck drivers parked at a rest area across the motorway were questioned extensively. Their hands were tested for gunshot residue. Every result came back negative. Nobody reported seeing a suspicious figure fleeing the scene. No clear witnesses ever emerged. And perhaps most disturbing of all, Xavier's 2 young children remained asleep in the vehicle nearby, while their father was murdered only a short distance away in the darkness. As investigators searched for answers, theories began to spread. Some believed Xavier had been the victim of a random failed carjacking. Others suspected something far more deliberate, possibly even a contract killing carried out at an isolated location chosen specifically because it offered darkness, distance, and very few witnesses. Then, 1 year later, another horrifying attack shook the French Alps. A British tourist named Saad al-Hili was ambushed and shot to death on a remote alpine road less than 160 kilometers away from where Xavier had been killed. Saad's wife and mother-in-law were also murdered, while 2 children survived the attack. The similarities between the crimes immediately fueled terrifying speculation. 2 brutal shootings, 2 families attacked near the French Alps, 2 unsolved cases involving surviving children left behind in the aftermath. Some investigators and locals quietly wondered if a predator had been hunting travelers moving through the isolated mountain roads, a killer targeting tourists beneath the cover of darkness before vanishing back into the wilderness. But despite years of investigation, no definitive connection between the 2 murders was ever proven. To this day, Xavier Balligant's murder remains unsolved, and somewhere along the silent roads that wind through the French Alps, the truth may still be waiting in the darkness. David Lovely's final ride. The desert outside of Rock Springs, Wyoming, has a way of swallowing things. Miles of empty highway, jagged ravines stretching endlessly into darkness, winds that scream across the open land after sunset like something alive beneath the sand. During the day, the heat can feel unbearable, but at night, the cold settles in fast, wrapping itself around the empty roads and isolated rest stops scattered across Interstate 80. And in the summer of 1985, somewhere out there in that vast Wyoming wilderness, 19-year-old David Lovely vanished without a trace. David was traveling cross-country with his mother Jackie and his 18-year-old sister Allison during a move from California back to Massachusetts. Their belongings were packed tightly into a rider moving truck, towing another vehicle behind it. But David didn't want to ride in the cramped truck for thousands of miles. Instead, he followed behind them on his motorcycle, carrying some of his own supplies as the family crossed state after state together. At first, the trip seemed normal. The family had developed a routine. Every 30 miles or so, they would stop and check on one another before continuing east along the endless highway. Sometimes David rode ahead, sometimes he fell behind, but eventually they always regrouped. Until August 5th. That day, the family stopped in Evanston, Wyoming. David mentioned that his motorcycle had been giving him trouble and said he wanted to push ahead toward Fort Bridger to see if someone there could help repair it. He told his mother and sister he would meet them later at a nearby rest stop farther down the interstate. It sounded simple enough, just another quick stop on a long road trip. But it would become the last confirmed moment anyone in his family ever saw him. Later that day, Jackie and Allison arrived at the agreed meeting point and waited for David to appear. Traffic drifted past through the Wyoming night. Headlights swept across the empty parking area. Diesel engines rumbled somewhere beyond the darkness. But David never arrived. They stayed there the entire night. Still no sign of him. Then the family learned something unsettling. David had managed to call his aunt from a payphone at the bingo truck stop in Fort Bridger. According to David, his motorcycle had broken down completely, forcing him to push it the rest of the way to the truck stop. While stranded there, he encountered a rough-looking biker riding a Harley-Davidson. David admitted the man scared him at first, but strangely, the biker reportedly helped repair the motorcycle instead. David told his aunt he planned to get back on the road and reconnect with his family soon. That phone call would become the last verified contact anyone ever had with David Lovely. The next morning, Jackie and Allison continued east, believing David might catch up to them farther along the highway. They waited again in Rock Springs, then in Cheyenne, then farther into Nebraska. But every stop became more terrifying than the last. David never appeared. As the days passed, panic began to settle over the family. Police were eventually notified, but the investigation quickly became complicated. Nobody even knew exactly where David had disappeared. Wyoming authorities pointed toward Nebraska. Nebraska pointed back toward Wyoming. David's motorcycle was still registered in California, and somewhere between isolated truck stops and endless desert highways, the trail simply vanished. Then 9 days later came the discovery that made the case even stranger. A man camping near Middle Baxter Road outside Rock Springs stumbled across an abandoned motorcycle sitting far down an isolated dirt road near the local airport grounds. Beside it were David's belongings, his helmet, books, backpack, and knapsack. The keys were still sitting in the ignition. The gas tank was half full. And when investigators examined the motorcycle, they discovered something chilling. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it. The bike was fully operational. David's wallet was still there too, containing around $150 in cash. Nothing appeared stolen, nothing appeared damaged. It was as if someone had simply parked the motorcycle in the middle of nowhere and walked off into the Wyoming wilderness. But why? That question has haunted investigators and David's family for decades. Some believe David may have become disoriented after leaving the bike behind and wandered into the unforgiving terrain surrounding Rock Springs. The landscape is filled with steep ravines, hidden drop-offs, and endless stretches of empty desert capable of swallowing someone whole. Temperatures in Wyoming can drop rapidly after dark, and exposure alone could have proven deadly. Others believe something far darker happened. Perhaps someone offered David help. Perhaps someone lured him away from the road. Or perhaps the mysterious biker from Fort Bridger knew more than anyone realized. Because despite extensive searches, no confirmed trace of David Lovely has ever been found. No body, no answers, just an abandoned motorcycle sitting silently beneath the Wyoming sky. And somewhere out there beyond the interstate, beyond the truck stops and empty rest areas, the mystery of what truly happened to 19-year-old David Lovely still remains buried in the darkness. The story ends here, but the terror does not. Join me again, like, comment, and subscribe if you dare.